Anthony Kazub. I am chair of the Toronto Audio Engineering Society, and I am a senior systems designer for one of Canada's biggest broadcasters, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC. Second half of this presentation is one of my great friends, colleagues, mentors, Michael Nunan, who is going to present a somewhat of a condensed version or a recap of what he presented at the Members Showcase. Part of the Audio Engineering Society as well, we are very member driven. It is very important to us to have member participation, whether it's through content, whether it's through contributing to the executive, whether it's just growing the community of audio engineers in our community, which is Toronto. Toronto AES chapter, we are 52 years old, I believe. This is one of the eldest, one of the eldest chapters of the Audio Engineering Society. And the objective of the Audio Engineering Society is to unite engineers, technicians, operators in all of the allied arts to collate, collect, and disseminate scientific knowledge about the field of audio. Audio isn't just one branch of the technology. It is multiple branches of technologies, applications, people, workflow, different places, different types of environments to work in, and we endeavor to constantly disseminate information, share information with our community that is related to all of these groups. And tonight's topic is no different than that. And the meeting that was originally planned for this week or this month was a tour to various record manufacturing facilities. And we are putting that on pause, obviously, as we all, deal with a pandemic. We are planning to revisit that meeting once this is all settled in some way, shape, or form, because it is a true privilege and honor to be able to tour a functioning record pressing facility and also a company who is really innovating and leading the world's technology in vinyl press manufacturing. So that would be great. Our sponsors: Gear Audio, YSL Audio, Electrosonics Canada, Solotech, Sonotechnique, avshop.ca, Adamson, BellMedia, Lawo, Global USS, and BRTB have been fantastic to keeping this organization fresh. I wish, normally we would have beverages and food and coffee for our members who come to this meeting. But here we are, we're, able to meet at home. So everybody gets a gift card. No, I'm just joking. We don't have gift cards. There's no gift cards for you. So, but in the future, as COVID-19 changes the world we live in, we are obviously going to have to reevaluate how some of our meetings work. And some of the meetings up and coming, and we wish nothing more than good health to all of those who are involved in the industry. We understand and appreciate the situation we find ourselves in professionally, because a lot of our allied arts are at a complete and total standstill. Right now, the two industries that are really, frothing at the mouth for content are the news, I guess, and live radio. And myself, and my job at the CBC is system design for some radio and television stuff. So this week, I had two conversations with two colleagues of mine. Gary and I we're working on some intercom stuff. And Daniel and I are working on some, again, more intercom stuff as we grow and shrink our intercom. Anyway, it's a fun project. This week I built 7 emergency home studios for people. It was as serious as I need a microphone, I need I need a microphone, I need a preamp, I need a set of headphones, I need it in a box, and it's got to show up on this guy's doorstep tomorrow, type of thing. And we're typically 3 weeks out in terms of content, sometimes 2. But this will evolve our workflow and change our workflow. And we'll be very excited for it. The first clip is an interview that I did with Gary Gornick, who is Gary on the phone? Did Gary make it out?
I am here.
Man, Gary, would you like to do this live or would you like to do this recorded? We got 7 minutes.
Well, you probably took out a lot of the profanity, so let's do the record.
Let's do the record. Okay, I didn't edit it all because I'm terrible at editing. So, Michael, Gary is a senior systems engineer, broadcast technician, technologist, and all-around amazing person. If you could play that recording, Michael, I would appreciate that. Thank you so much. The corporation for CBC for how long? You've been with CBC for
30 years in May.
30 years in May. So how would 30 years ago they broadcast from home? They couldn't have done it.
I believe at that time, telephone hybrids for audio was the only method. And again, that would have just been for audio. 30 years ago, for doing a remote would have been a microwave uplink, which I don't remember the trucks even, and satellite would have been the satellite ones, or if there's telecommunication lines that are in existence. So if you were at your home site and the remote location was some major venue, then it would have been possible to arrange a lease or a rental of a line for a period of time. So
like high-end, like full, like un-EQ'd telephone lines. And what would you be able to do video through the telephone lines? Or
well, those are the ones that would have had both audio and video. So they would have been hopefully EQ'd. Back then, of course, it was composite, most likely a mono or dual mono audio, and everything handled individually. So again, delay potentially could have been more of, well, it was an issue back then, especially when we were having to then run the signals through frame synchronizers without delaying the audio typically. So if the telecommunications line had a level of delay, we typically were not able to handle it. And even now I'm finding, at least as watching from home, it's still an issue where sometimes the audio is out of sync with the signal. But again, I don't know from home, is it where in the chain is that error occurring?
But with SDI and encoded video stuff, it's all traveling as one bundle now. So we yes. negate a lot of that by muxing right at the cameras that are out in the field and bringing the audio back, not through some unique path, but through like an SDI encoded signal out in the regions. And you did HD TV across Canada, like for something like the regional news that is coming in. Like, could you explain a little bit how those signals get to the control rooms here in Toronto? And in Montreal?
Gladly. So while you were mentioning the fact that we're assuming that the muxing of the audio with the video is happening right at the source for our complex studio environment, it is actually happening in a more complex manner. Typically, and again, for the CBC, what we are doing is doing a remote studio method, which other broadcasters have also done. So our audio is being muxed with the cameras at the region. The region will most likely not have the control room locally, but remotely. So using, for instance, PEI, their remote studio is actually Vancouver, which is about a 4-hour difference in time zones for them. So you can imagine just dealing with those scheduling issues. So the audio is muxed with the cameras, and the multiple cameras have the multiple audios muxed. So there's redundancy of source that is sent along those lines. The remote studio then obviously will demux them, where your different latencies can then occur is in those environments. If they're running through different paths, most broadcasters, to my knowledge, really don't do any further delaying of the audio to the video. So if there's a frame or two here, a frame or two there, it's good enough. We're still hitting that cusp of where the perceivable difference is before the audio is finalized, combined, and sent out for public consumption. So
but the communication link is also all 100% IP through like telephone codecs that go directly into IFBs that are at the talent's feet. Those IP codecs are just part of the intercom system, and that coordination part requires a lot of planning and execution. What are some challenges right now with the increased workload on the resources of our network and things that are happening with the pandemic? Like this is an unprecedented test of all of our systems combined simultaneously. And it is also the icing of other systems because there is fewer productions happening because of safety reasons, obviously. These control signals, how are those managed, and what actually is needed to coordinate and execute these communication links between the regions, the regional production shows? Talk a little bit about that, if you could.
Okay, I will try and answer all 6 questions that you gave me in that last statement. And in fairness, I will not fully encompass them. But so in general, let's take a look at the old days of the workflow. So in our typical office environment, we have 2 regions, the mothership, in this case, the remote studio control room location, and the studio floor. Again, 2 different cities. The CBC is using high-speed data links to transport, as you mentioned, all of our content professionally between locations. They are then frame synced on each end, converted back to baseband eventually in some form and fashion, as well as other signals ride upon those same pipes. So one of the problems that they would have regardless is balancing those data pipes for the actual load and also doing quality of service setups, which is standard industry. For the video pipe, you will carve up a bigger allocation of data compared to audio, typically, again, going by how many paths, as well as which codecs are you using for doing your contents. So that is the base thing. Now, the complexity that CBC and everyone else is dealing with now is the networks are now going further out to the edges. So my home connection and yours that we're presently using for this interview, we are using whatever consumer grade interconnect is being provided to us, and it sounds very decent.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah,
interconnects, but being at 10:20 in the morning, it's very possible that a lot of the kids are still in bed and aren't hammering the network, surf Netflix and YouTube and other high demand
online learning. They're doing their online learning. They're doing their government associated online learning. Their teachers are actually being diligent, and there are online learning courses for all these kids. So
oh goodness, Anthony, you were definitely definitely you should be running for a higher level of government. Or you fit right in. So anyhow, we're stressing, so the networks, and these are outside of control of any one specific group. So you can imagine, to a certain degree, unless you actually have a business class line where, again, you are paying for a level of service, a quality of service, it's going to be very random on the quality of this. And we see it. CBC has interviews with doctors and other professionals outside of the
a lot of Skype stuff.
And you're seeing some of the Skype stuff is fantastic. So I'm going to assume they must have a business class setup, because the cameras look amazing, and the quality of service was fantastic. While for some of the homes, you will see intermittent breakups, but in general, we are very blessed with a high quality setup in general available to the general public outside of a typical demand. So the next thing is trying to then control going into our stations. Our VPNs, when required, can be under stress, as well as the next thing is having the staff who are not used to dealing with this environment cognizant of what is the proper method to use a VPN. When do I need the VPN, and what should I be doing to manage it? Because what can happen, and I'm sure this doesn't happen anywhere, but it's possible, someone logs in using their VPN account and decides to watch YouTube for the next 20 minutes for their is that appropriate for the connection, the bandwidth of it? Most likely not. But do I need to use a VPN, for instance, myself and for yours today? We're doing this email exchange and Hangout.
Absolutely not.
Outside of any VPN.
But here we're doing some configuration. The meeting that you and I are currently working on after this is about remotely accessing connection panels remotely to configure communication links between one of our region station and another regional station.
Exactly.
So here you and I are allowed to engineer from home because of the capabilities of the VPN. You're right. Like, people can watch YouTube. I'm way more concerned over some Pro Tools editor downloading, a 25 gig video file, or like tries to stream it from a server, or accesses an SQL database that is not set up for VPN use, but set up for intranet type of use. Those types of systems I have seen, take a beating because, they were never designed to work that way. And
exactly. It's that's where workflows need to be actually ideally predefined and communicated, and then also accessible for the individuals.
The new norm.
A lot of those details, while I'm aware of them, I simply don't know the specifics.
Yeah, I think there will be a new norm after some of this stuff, and it's really interesting to see how these links will behave and all that jazz. And Gary, thank you so very much for your insight. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat about this.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.
All right, you be well. Gary is fantastic. He's done systems all over Canada, around the world for CBC. Tons of video, radio, television. Gary's on the line, so if there may be questions, you put them in the chat window. That's how we're going to deal with this. We're gonna of course just put it in the chat window, and at the end of this, we're gonna compress as much time to ask questions to these people. Another person I had a chat with today is Daniel Pereira, who is fantastic. He is a software guru. He is a workflow guru for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He was very much behind programming the workflows that are the automated centralized news production facilities of the Toronto Broadcast Centre. Here's a conversation I had with him earlier today as he was working from home. All right, I got a very interesting character from the CBC on the line. I have Daniel Pereira. Daniel and I have crossed paths just recently on some projects. Daniel, how are you?
Hey, Anthony, I'm well. How are you?
Oh, very well. There's a pandemic out there, so
What,
we're doing
really?
this. It escalated quite quickly, and you've been thrown into a very interesting trench. And uh, could you tell us what you do, who you do it for, and what has kept you busy this last week?
Yeah, so I'm currently a technical producer at CBC. I work for a department called Production Services. So I typically get thrown into a bunch of different things depending what the need is. I do a lot of live events, web streams. I do some broadcast shows. A lot of that has been canceled of late. Before I had this position, I worked primarily for CBC Television News. And given the current COVID-19 situation, I've been assigned back to work with news and kind of help them figure out how to keep their operation rolling, how to kind of plan for contingency, and how to stay ahead of things by social distancing people and primarily getting as many people out of the broadcast center that we can to work remotely.
And that's a monumental task, considering you have to essentially remote, people's functionality and remote people's desks. So, what kind of challenges has the news department thrown your direction this week, technically, that have been keeping you up at night?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different aspects to moving people who work in television news out of the building. The primary kind of things that we need to work on over and above what you might do for anybody who might need to work at home. Like obviously there's the remote access to certain software, certain tools, but for television broadcast, people working on the news need the ability to see things. So live events that are happening, shots that are coming in from the field, either live or recorded. And they need the ability to communicate like in real time. So when you're sitting in a newsroom or in a television control room, kind of the physical proximity of people is a key element in order to get work done quickly. You might have a writer kind of yell out, "Hey, do you have the latest fact on such and such, blah, blah, blah," and things get moving from there so we can quickly get information on the air. So those are the challenges, kind of remote monitoring of video and the ability to communicate quickly.
So remote monitoring, you're talking like a web browser that logs into some type of multi-viewer that is, sending out some type of stream down to these talents, or what is somebody who is throwing to the news got at home, and what do they see, and what comes back from them?
Yeah, so what we've been able to give to a lot of people who work on the news is a multi-view of kind of all the video signals that hit a television control room. So they can see what's going on air, what's next, and all of the kind of live and tape elements that are ready to roll in little windows within a single video stream. And we're sending that out as a video stream that they can open on their desktops at home. And we've actually made that available. I don't know how technical you want to get, but like outside of our corporate network so that they don't have to use VPN to be able to see these types of things.
So there's a publicly encoded, publicly available web stream someplace that employees can access, and it's not burdening the VPN system.
Yeah, that's right. So a stream that they can open at home doesn't burden VPN, and we've tried to keep it as low latency as possible. Because obviously if they're having conversations about something with somebody who still is in the building, in the control room, who's kind of experiencing these things in real time, they can't be too far off. So latency matters.
Latency
sure.
matters. Yeah, 100%. So bi-directional communication link, you have an intercom system, you have microphones out in the field, you have microphones plugged into cameras, you have IFBs. What are the tricks of the trades in pandemic 2019? That is pandemic 2020. What are some of the tricks of the trade that you're employing to maintain these communication links, but also tie into existing infrastructure that is in the building?
Yeah. So it depends on the need. Some of our users can use technology that's similar to what, a normal office worker might use in terms of text chat, phone call, video conferences, etc. But we've talked about kind of the control room and the nature of real-time communication, and you just outlined some of the signals that are coming in and out in real time. So like when you're in the building, a big piece of that is a production intercom, which is push to talk, point to point. It's a matrix system so that different users can select who they're talking to at any one time, and kind of target their communication and minimize noise. Like audio quality is a big thing. We've all probably in this situation been on a bunch of conference calls and video calls where people have microphones of various quality, internet connections of various quality, and the conversation suffers. When you're producing a live newscast, not having any of that is very important. So obviously in a building, we have a matrix intercom system. Now, what we started to do for remote workers, which is kind of a project that you and I have recently started to work together on, is we've been employing an intercom app. It's called Unity, and it's from a company called Audio Vero. And I believe they got their start developing an app for people to be able to listen to television screens, like in gyms and in sports bars. Like the idea was you'd download an app and you'd be able to pick which screen to listen to. I believe that's where the technology started.
Super cool. It's always a bar. Some guys at a bar have a need.
That's right.
Would be great. It'd be great is I can listen to all these TVs all at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's I believe that's where the company started with the technology that originally became Unity Intercom. But when you think about that scenario, the need is relatively low bandwidth, because if you have tons of people in a sports bar or a gym, like you're not wanting to deploy an overly ridiculous network to make that happen. Really low latency, because you want to be able to listen on your device and have it match up with what's on the screen. And so Audio Vero kind of rolled some of that technology into a product called Unity Intercom, which is an app, and it has a server that runs on Mac OS. And they allow you to tie different party line channels in the app to existing production intercoms via 4-wire analog connections. So our audio team and engineering team at CBC had already kind of experimented with this tool, and we had a system up and running in the building, well, kind of up and running, that we were able to deploy fairly quickly, but kind of the capacity of it was limited. So that's where you and I kind of embarked on this project to commission a new system for news, which we actually hope to roll out tomorrow, which has a whole lot more channels and should support a whole bunch more users.
Well, and the trick of it all is IP. We live in an IP world. You had some challenges getting the computer, and all of our technical services were from internally, but they were all working from home. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you faced in the deployment of this system?
Yeah, sure. So, to first get the system up and running, we had a guy on premises who was able to, check physical cables, make sure it was all working. After that, we wanted to remote administer it. So, typical corporate screen share, remote access tools to manage the server remotely. A lot of our senior production audio folks do have VPN access, so they can access the matrix intercoms and stuff from home. But when we started to think about this new system, as you said, remote administration was a key factor. Audio over IP allows us to make changes remotely. So what we wound up doing is we wound up using Dante audio over IP to tie this new server in with our production intercoms. So we mostly currently use RTS matrix intercoms, which have RTS has a version of Dante they call Omnio, that is Dante with metadata added for their products. And you can connect normal Dante connections to their Omnio cards, kind of a digital version of 4-wire, I guess you'd call it. Yep. And so now with the system that we just got up and running only a couple of hours ago, remotely, we're able to route 64 channels of input and 64 channels of output from this server to any production intercom in the building. And beyond that, I had a meeting this morning with a colleague in Vancouver who has some needs for the two English services TV control rooms in Vancouver. And we talked about how kind of once we've got, things settled a little bit more in Toronto, we might actually be able to offer this system to our production intercoms in Vancouver. And the way we plan to do that is we have Dante, audio over IP in the building, which is, high quality, uncompressed. But we can then create Arvon audio over IP links with our Matrix intercom in Vancouver. So Arvon,
which are like a VoIP quality. It's a VoIP quality line.
That's right. Yeah, it's a similar codec to what's used in VoIP. Again, with RTS kind of metadata and intercom stuff added over it. And yeah, that's so our eventual plan that we've just only started discussing this morning is that, we can tie some channels into a Toronto matrix using Dante, and then send them to Vancouver over Arvon, this audio, this VoIP codec, and then our colleagues in Vancouver can leverage some of our capacity in Toronto, and all of this kind of configured remotely by our senior audio folks who are safe at home right now.
Daniel, thank you so very much for taking the time to share your insight. Thanks for keeping the news on. I got to say, it's an important thing, and all the best to you. And you stay safe working from home. I will see you when I see you, right?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Anthony.
Okay, you be well.
You too, sir.
Thank you very much. I got a very interesting double down. Another interesting character is Mr. Michael Nunan. Michael, how are you?
I'm just pleased to be here. Thank you, Anthony.
I got to say, Daniel, as a video guy, had the best sounding audio so far. Who else had the better sounding audio? We had a really good sound check there. Howard Bagley. Listen to Howard Bagley. Howard, you're on the air.
9:45 with a big shout downtown Toronto.
Man, Howard, it's so fantastic to see you and Michael Nunan up to some crazy shenanigans. You obviously are you are the Stanley Cup winner of many audio prizes, that's for sure. And now that there's no hockey, how do you think sports fans are out there? Howard, what are sports fans doing to keep themselves from going crazy because there's no sports?
Watching actual players play sport video games is what I'm gathering. Probably
I see. Really? Is like esports of like real people playing themselves a thing now?
I guess so. I honestly am not following it, but I saw an article that some NBA stars were actually competing on some software and playing virtual games.
I think
that's amazing.
I think Formula One has that distinction. 2 weeks ago, in lieu of their inaugural Grand Prix for the season, they held a virtual Grand Prix, and some of the F1 drivers actually competed.
I got a race car track for my 4-year-old, and I want to power it with my treadmill. So we have to use the treadmill to get the race car track going. Yeah, that's and we'll take bets online. I think that's if somebody can make bets, that's really what it's gonna get the viewership up. It's the betting. Well, Howard, I hope to hear from you in Michael's presentation here, yeah.
He may lob me something. We'll wait and see.
Well, why don't we start where? Sorry, was that my cue, Anthony? We hadn't rehearsed the throw. Good evening, everyone. So great to see so many familiar names, if not faces directly. Let's start where Anthony and Daniel left off. What sounds like it's an emerging experiment at CBC has been an evolving and continually growing part of our daily life in the news operation for the last couple of years, and that's that Unity intercom system. And to say that it's revolutionized the way that Howard and my production audio gang go about tackling the news every day is maybe a bit of an understatement. Howard, why don't you tell us a little bit about life on something like CTV Toronto News at noon, which is one of our busiest shows. Why don't you, jump into the Wayback Machine and imagine what the noon news was like those many months ago, and versus what it's like now.
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of the workflow as it pertained to live remotes inbound to the news show were based on POTS lines, and ironically enough, we just installed 16 brand new POTS lines and hybrids into our operation for the CTV local news. And but along came Unity, which has changed our world immensely. The product itself is great because they basically, the reporters out in the field can pick the mix minus that they need for obviously we have to liaise with the production people, the resources coordinators, to make sure that they understand what the reporters need. We let them know, although Michael, in his amazingness, is trying to think of ways that we can even automate all that information, but that's further down the line. But the bottom line is you've got a really great sounding, almost instantaneous, almost as quick as a POTS line. And that's the one benefit of a POTS line, of course, is that it's almost instantaneous, given it's only analog. But low processing times and a great quite wide bandwidth Q circuit back to the announcer with the proper mix minus. And it's certainly, and they choose. We don't have to now engage a hybrid. We don't have to go through that workflow. They pick the one that they need and they listen. They can monitor communication, 4-wire communication to our matrix through Unity. It's definitely made our life a lot better.
So, I mean, this started with our fellows down at our Queen Street operation and CP24. They sort of inaugurated this for us, and now Unity is sort of spreading its tendrils everywhere. Basically, what Howard's saying is, the reporter pulls a cell phone out of their pocket, and instead of dialing a 10-digit POTS number that someone has to answer here, and then Howard has to latch it, and then has to make sure that the right IFB or interrupt is going into that hybrid. Now the reporter pulls the Unity app out of their pocket, has immediate access to every IFB from every one of our news control rooms, selects the appropriate one. They've been told ahead of time by the resources production team, what line they're going to land on. They just dial up the IFB, click the button, put it back in their pocket, and they're good for go. The upside to that, truly, just in the last sort of 20 days or so, has been the fact that we haven't had to pivot onto Unity. A huge chunk of the news organization was already kind of down with using it. And this has especially paid dividends as we've tried to start pushing presenters and talent out of the building and doing things like, doing a hit from home. Where's my phone? Doing a hit from home, with a Degero app or FaceTime or Skype on their phone. So Gary, in his interview there with Anthony, was talking well about the fact that we can get some really remarkable audio quality out of some really low bit rate, residential internet connections. But quite aside from the quality of the signal, which of course starts with the quality of the microphone that someone's maybe talking into, and you're only going to get so much out of Apple AirPods. But Howard, maybe now's a good time to talk about the not so secret downside of things like Skype and FaceTime. In a situation where you've got a whole bunch of people trying to communicate a little bit like this, and where Unity can also pay a kind of a secret dividend. The thing that we get really beat on constantly, and more so now in the last sort of 10 days, is this notion of half duplex. Howard, over to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've spent a lot of my time coming up with ways to explain to commentators why when they start to speak on a FaceTime line, on a call, when they're doing an interview, that as soon as they start to speak, they lose the inbound audio, which of course is the half duplex aspect of the codecs involved with FaceTime. It's funny, in just sitting here talking to Gary Gornick talk about how many years ago, when we first started doing the satellite hot stove on Hockey Night in Canada, many, many years ago with Ron McLean, once we started going digital and getting to higher quality video over our satellite uplinks, of course, our processing time went up. And the delay was really not lending itself to a spontaneous interview. So I'm thinking back to those days, and they hated it. I mean, and they were looking for ways to circumvent time and space that it was just never going to happen. But you know, with FaceTime, we actually, the one thing about FaceTime, and the amazing thing is, it is almost instantaneous. Like, I mean, we get rid of all of that delay because virtually from around the world, it's as quick as your network will allow it, and it's actually quite fascinating. It's so good. Of course, the quality sucks, but I mean, for a spontaneous interview, it's great, except that you can't overlap each other, because as soon as you start to talk, of course, and I have to explain to them, once, you know, try to harken back to your last cell phone call and how many times you went, oh, no, go ahead. No, you go. Exactly. And that's exactly the same thing that's happening with FaceTime. So as Michael's alluding to, what we've done is we've kind of hybrided that. We've got one commentator who now listens to Unity for his Q circuit and uses a separate device for his FaceTime, and or Dejero or whatever he's got on his phone, uses two devices, thereby making his duplex circuit, which is helping them out. But yeah, that's the problem.
Thanks, Howard. Maybe I'll step back. This meeting tonight, this experiment, sort of came about out of a conversation that Earl and I had several days ago, which on that particular day was one of 4 or 5, I think, conversations. I think, and let's see who else. I'm sure I've had this conversation with 4 or 5 people who are on this call. Well, there I see Terry. Hi, Terry. You know, some of you may have seen my presentation last month at the Members Showcase, and if not, you might have heard about it, where in late February, just really on the cusp of, this pandemic, we were doing an internal Bell event in Montreal, where, as a matter of experimentation, we wanted to see whether it was possible to have multiple musicians in multiple locations collaborate together in real time, and not with any sort of fakery, but an authentic and organic musical collaboration. And sort of against all odds, we pulled it off. 8 musicians in 3 locations across 600 plus kilometers. And it worked. Okay, so that's great. I won't go into the gritty details except to say that it required an almost bottomless pit of resources and a small army of specialists and technicians, which is to say it's not really ready for prime time. But in my remarks to the conference, the morning that we had sort of unveiled it, I suggested to the assembled audience, and this is the senior management of the Bell Network division. These are the men and women who are responsible for the architecture that underpins all of our services, like our data network. And I suggested that this was maybe an idea whose time had come. This notion of seeing if it's, you know, using the network in this admittedly edge case kind of scenario to permit this evolutionary form of the performing arts or variety in general. So anyways, I said, maybe it's an idea whose time it's come. Well, smash cut to about a week ago, and someone who was in attendance that day sent me a Facebook message and said, hey, remember that thing in Montreal where you said, like, maybe this is an idea whose time has come? How about next time a little less dramatic irony, huh? Because of course we didn't realize that only a few weeks later we were all going to be in the middle of this. And on that day that Earl and I had the conversation, several people had reached out to me saying, how do I do a version of the same thing? I've got a bunch of clients who are desperate to make hay while the sun is shining, and our audiences are trapped at home, and my clients are trapped at home, but we've all got connectivity. Surely to God, we can connect these dots and put artists together with audience, and those artists who are able to make that connection are maybe going to get a lot of goodwill out of having made the attempt and having reached out to, you know, create and continue to foster a sense of community despite the fact that we're all isolated. And the simple but sorry truth is, not really. Not now, not yet. Not in a way where you've got multiple people in multiple locations. So if one of your clients happens to be the singing Von Trapps, you've got half a chance. Or a husband and wife team, or a boyfriend and girlfriend, or, you know, singing sisters, or, you know, if you've got people who are already cohabitating so that they can appear together on camera these days and not be excoriated in social media for fundamentally violating some notion of social distancing. Well, yeah, this meeting today is proof that you can put an assembly, a big assembly of people. 72 is our high water mark this evening. We're at 68 participants at the moment. This is kind of proof that you can do this. Absolutely. And the audio quality of Zoom notwithstanding, it's a 32 kilobit stream. It's not going to put anyone's ears back, but that sense of immediacy and connection is maybe worth a bunch of fidelity. I mean, there's that old gag in the TV world that the definition of broadcast is whatever quality you're prepared to broadcast, right? That's the definition of broadcast quality. There's no line in the sand that says this far and no further. Once upon a time, we said we're not going to air MP3s. Yeah, that didn't last long. Because when the only footage you have of that crash is something off of a lousy smartphone, guess what's going to air? So maybe the quality of this kind of connection is less material than the intent of that connection. So with that said, flip over to how Anthony started the meeting talking with Gary and Daniel, and this notion of, you know, what's been consuming those of us who are involved with news. And that's this idea that, well, news has always been, but is now more than ever seen as an essential service. There's a public safety and a public service component to what it is we're doing. And so, you know, both Gary and Daniel with Anthony kind of made the point, and I'll continue to make it, that everything that makes it impossible to do this musically is not a barrier to entry for the kind of content that, you know, that we're creating every day, trying to keep Canadians informed. You know, 90 milliseconds of latency in the TV world, 3 frames, is nearly instantaneous, and there's a really good chance that nobody in the control room is even going to bark at you. We've all seen those pregnant pause, you know, interviews when the reporter or the host, the news host, asks a question, and everyone in the control room is saying, "Please, dear God, speak," and it's 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4. Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that, Ken. Right? We routinely suffer multi-second delays in these low bit rate connections, and people are annoyed, but so long as the AV is mostly in sync, we sort of get on with it. So if you can get down to something measured in tens of milliseconds, carry on. That's fantastic. The fact that we can get, you know, supremely low latency communications and critical path signals to and from, you know, a typical smart device is dead nuts easy. And that's been a big part of it. I'm sure Anthony and the CBC gang would agree with me. There's going to be some really interesting conversations when we get out of this, because for years our planning, Anthony, hasn't been about pandemic. I can tell you how many times I heard the word pandemic in disaster recovery and business continuity plans over the last number of years. We plan. Yeah, well,
so did all the governments across the country. You're not alone. You know, like if all the governments across all the world currently have that exact same conversation. Right. You know, pandemic, there was the pandemic. You know, that pandemic meeting that was like every 3 weeks on a rotating schedule that we skip? Yeah. Yeah. We should have frequency on that.
So I see here that Ryan Watt, one of my colleagues, has joined. Ryan's one of my fellows in the on the senior operations team here at BellMedia. Ryan handles all of the folks in production control rooms and studios that I don't, meaning anyone who isn't an audio guy. So Ryan's the honorary attendee, one of the honorary attendees of the Audio Engineering Society meeting here. So everyone give a wave to Ryan, because, you know, yeah, okay.
I want to say I love your scarf, Bags.
It's not a scarf. That's my, see, I went to the grocery store.
Oh.
Oh, good. You're a stick-up man now. Lovely. So Ryan, you know, all of our planning year over year has been about, you know, what happens if we can't get access to a building? What happens if we suffer some catastrophic failure in a production control room and we lose a switcher or we lose a console? You know, can we move the show? Can we move national news into another control room? Can we move them temporarily into another studio space, right? They've always been these sort of physical things. And now, among many others, and we're still trying to make those plans, because if we have to vacate a control room for 12 hours to have it sanitized because it turns out someone, you know, comes up sick on shift, and, you know, we have to clean, you know, do a deep clean on the control room, we're going to still need to be able to mount the news somewhere else. But more interestingly, we're doing now something that we've never tried to do, and that is imagine a world in which we're decentralizing production control. So no matter where we did the national news, we always assumed that the director and the producer and the technical director and the graphics operator and the audio person, they'd all be in one place. Never mind how far distant they might be from the studio that was hosting the news. But now we're trying to imagine what happens, like, can we legitimately explode the production model and exploit these sorts of tools so that Howard could mix from his panic room there where he's sitting right now, so that Ryan could cut the news if he was the TD. So Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about what we've been playing at?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've got into worlds of, I mean, the biggest thing, and Bags sort of got into it when we talked about the Unity thing and how we can utilize Unity as a you know, a decentralized intercom system, so to speak, so it doesn't matter where you are remotely. Something like that is key, because from a video angle, I know that we can sit and I can get a virtual output of a switcher in a control room. And I could have that on my monitor right here, and I can connect to a switcher that's sitting in any control room in Agincourt, and I'd be able to sit and cut a show together as far as the video goes. You know, we need that part with audio. We need that part with you know, we've got Chiron systems. We look at things like remoting into all of these systems, and I think Daniel was talking about it earlier, how key it is to be able to remote into different systems. TeamViewer is a player that we're sort of utilizing quite a bit for all of our stuff that's on location. So it's not so much we can all work remotely. It's being able to work remotely together, and that's the challenge. We've built some stuff, you know, in a trailer off-site, sort of still within the network, but not in the building, and that gives us a way of just being able to still be within the same network and on top of things. We're not VPNing into anything. We're not doing any of that kind of stuff, but we know we have access to all of the things, and everything works as it should. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but it's a little bit harder when I'm sitting in my living room and I've got a VPN in, and the audio guy's got a VPN in, and everybody needs program return. I need program sound. I need the sound that's coming from Bags's, you know, cold cellar. We all got to be on the same page, and that's the part that I think gets a little bit tricky. And I don't know that we've blown that out entirely to know that it works perfectly. You're muted, Nunan.
There we are. Sorry. No, we certainly haven't. Hey, hi from Toronto. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, fine. You can take it out of my pay, Watt.
Event and tally. What you guys just experienced there was the control protocol event and tally. He saw that he was closed. He saw this. The metadata around the events and tally of these communication systems are growing too. You know, as you guys just did that handover for broadcast to broadcast, and you had your cough mic up, your internal instincts as technical people are like, hey man, check all the status symbols, and your eyes quickly glance through like a list of status for whose microphone was open or not. Like this is something that we're seeing huge amounts of. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, you're very welcome for the mistake. Yeah, I think to build on what Ryan said, I think we've come to the conclusion that it's self-evident, but we've never really taken the thoughts to their logical extreme, and that is anything that can be remotely controlled can be controlled remotely. So we think of being able to walk around the floor of the studio with an iPad that can control the console so that I don't need to be in two places at once. But we seldom think about, well, just how far can we push that model? How far away can we be? I see Kipros there. Hi, Kipros. It was several years ago now when I walked into my lab here one day and I launched a copy of something called Virtual Vista, the remote control software for Vista consoles, and I was expecting to see a training template, just a dummy console. But when I launched the software on this Windows machine, suddenly I saw VU meters moving and labels on faders, on scribble strips that I didn't recognize. And luckily I didn't touch anything. I called Kipros and I said, I'm seeing a bunch of stuff here, and it looks to, and I was 13 feet away from here in Scarborough. And I said to Kipros on the phone, I'm pretty sure I'm looking at Saskatoon's console and I'm not sure how that's possible. Is it possible that I'm actually remotely controlling Saskatoon's console? He said, well, we didn't mean for that to happen, but yes. Why don't you wait for them to be off air and see what happens when you wiggle a fader? And sure enough, we were, remotely controlling a console that was in the middle of the continent. So that's really the point. If you can control something by remotely, and we can build a secure enough tunnel to that piece of equipment from anywhere, at the sort of time granularity we need for television, especially for worst case scenario, business continuity, disaster recovery kind of TV, we can already do this from a whole bunch of places. And many of our stations across the country have become super inventive in these times. I think it was already mentioned by someone. Something as simple as pointing a security camera at the monitor wall in a main production control room. Hey, look, it's not going to win any awards for the quality of that visual, but that might be enough for a producer who's obliged to stay at home to be able to see what's going on and direct traffic, especially if they've got access to a low latency, high granularity communications device. And they're not just sort of bellowing into some conference call, which never works out well. Roy Yankee has also joined us, another honorary member of the call. Roy is my supervising editor here at BellMedia Studios North. And our work over the last 13 days has really fallen into three piles. The first pile would be transmission services, master controls, that kind of stuff. And we're having some success at being able to not just remote master controls from building to building, so that if we have a problem here in Agincourt, that we have the possibility to remote some of those master controls, let's say to Queen Street or to Montreal or to Calgary. But we're also having some success with being able to remotely control individual master control functions to someone's living room. So that's the first pile. The second pile is this notion of live production, and just of late that really means news and almost nothing else. Although TSN, for instance, is still doing a limited amount of live programming, just not live sports. And then the third pile, and by volume and in terms of head count, kind of the biggest pile, is post-production. And I don't necessarily just mean, someone who's trying to cut a documentary, although I mean that too, because with everybody stuck at home and everyone having nothing to do but consume content, the programming units are deeply aware of the fact that there is an elevated demand for content of all kinds. So even though we're having this kind of, well, this isn't normal and nobody's here, it feels, apocalyptic sort of feeling here in the broadcast center, most of our production partners are still trying to go hammer and tongs at creating net new content. But part of that post-production story is, of course, editing for news. I think, Roy, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but just as of end of business today, I think in the last 13 days, we've remoted something like 60 some odd picture editors of varying descriptions.
Between all our sites, yeah.
Well, just between here and Queen Street.
Yes.
Many, many, many more if we consider the other sites.
I did 22 myself.
Yeah. And that's not actually terribly complicated. If the editing is sort of low granularity, it's just, maybe it's something simple like presentation editing where you're just trying to clip things off for a master control or for some other distribution mechanism. Maybe all you need is a team viewer or a remote desktop type of thing. But for a production editor or someone who's cutting news, well, not only do they need a fair amount of horsepower, but they also need access to all of the systems that they would normally be grafted onto here. So now maybe you need a slightly more sophisticated version of that remote experience. But the real trick was, how does the producer or the director or the associate producer or whoever would normally be sitting beside you in the suite, much less, coming in and looking at it and saying, change this, I love that, I hate that, send it. Roy, why don't you talk about how we've sorted out this notion of editorial collaboration?
Well, for us, because we are mostly on HP workstations, HP has a product called remote graphics software, which is it's literally just another form of remote desktop. But the one limitation that remote desktop has is that only one person can not only control the machine, but see the machine. So with our editors, with the bulk of our media all on shared storage, we needed to have a window into the world in the building. So by using the RGS software, like I said, it's like remote desktop. So technically they're using the Media Composer in Agincourt or Queen Street or wherever. And the one benefit is you can have multiple connections back to the same desktop. By default, not everyone can control it, which is good because you want the producer to keep their fingers off. But it will allow you that much that they can at least see your screen. Now, they can't do a full screen preview. I've tried it. It gets stuttery, but at least, and I actually leading up to this tonight, I did seek feedback from a few of our editors, and one of them was saying, when the producer wants to see the full picture, I'll create an MPEG-4 that I'll send them. However, the benefit of this collaboration that you can do through the HP software allows the producer to work with me while I'm building things, like if they're working in After Effects or even Media Composer, while they're building, the producer can see it, so they don't have numerous revisions. They can avoid, as he said, I don't need to redo it 10 times. Now, you can extend it if you wanted to share control, like our media services. One thing we discovered overnight was one of them had been remoted into 3 machines, and someone else tried to get in, and they couldn't. If you try to connect a second to the machine, the first person will see a collaboration request, so they would have to physically okay it. Now, after that, you still have to physically okay granting control to someone else. Now, there are ways to configure it that I learned today by the seat of my pants on how to correct that and how to make it that for our media services, they can all grab whatever machines they have. They have 5 HP workstations that they all share, so it's regardless of who's logged in, they can all see it. And again, like I said, with the working with a producer, they can be sitting in their home looking at your screen, and you do have the control to keep their fingers off, but at least you can keep moving forward without waiting for someone to watch a video that they had to wait for you to create.
Yeah, and the only exception that we found so far to this notion of continuing to leverage internal resources like workstations and simply driving them by remote over a variety of means, TeamViewer being the first one that we want to try to get to, because with TeamViewer, I can let people do that with their own equipment at home. Secondarily, with more secure and sort of high capacity pipes like RDP or Apple Remote Desktop or RGS, as Roy mentioned. But in our world, that insists on a VPN connection, either a conventional VPN software connection or a physical VPN appliance. Plus corporate hardware. So we've been sort of scrambling to come up with hardware that we can redeploy to people's homes. The one exception that we found so far is Post Sound, and now blessedly, Post Sound, much as it pains me to admit it, is a luxury good in a time like this. So the Post Sound unit in general is less busy than they might be, but we have found that this idea of remoting Pro Tools, for instance, which is our DAW of choice, really works spectacularly badly. And really, the Post Sound guys really desperately need to have Pro Tools local to them. And once they do have it local to them and they can work locally, then it's merely a question of giving them enough visibility into the network that they can interact with content servers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we can do that over TeamViewer. So that's great. Except, absent this RGS kind of idea that Roy was mentioning, the remote graphics software, it's really tough to get a client to approve a mix. They can't walk into the room. You're doing it locally, so it's not like they can TeamView in well or remote in. And the old style way of, well, I'll just send you a QuickTime and you can listen to it and send me notes. That'll work, but that completely ruins your operational tempo. And so we've started exploring a bunch of things. One possible use case is a Degero product or part of the Degero ecosystem called QPoint, which uses the same data network to send return video. But also things like Source Connect Live, which works really, really well if you happen to be in the Pro Tools environment for streaming HD video and very high quality audio right off a timeline in Pro Tools, and that fires out over the public internet. And we use Source Connect a lot to connect to all of our voice talent all over the continent. So Source Live is something we're playing with, again, to facilitate remote screening, and that's point to multi-point, because inevitably there's a director and a line producer and a series producer and the executive producer, and they all want to sit in on the screening and chime in about this, that, or the other thing. And so Source Live is something we've been playing at. Alas, there doesn't appear to be, and if anyone on this call has knowledge of one, please do put up your hand, but there doesn't appear to be the equivalent of Zoom or WebEx or any of these sort of online collaboration tools. There doesn't appear to have any of doesn't appear to be any that permit a very high bitrate audio payload, and crucially a 2-channel minimum audio payload. Right, I'm seeing head shaking. So yeah, I don't think I've missed anything. And so we're doing these sort of weird multi-point things where someone's looking at something over Zoom or TeamViewer, but they're listening to a stream coming in on Source Live or QPoint. And yeah, look, a lot of this is all stuff that 3 weeks ago none of us were thinking about. And now everyone's sort of annoyed that someone hasn't put some work into developing the product. But for a lot of these use cases, these were science fiction only a few weeks ago.
Noonan, it's just it's really that collaboration within QPoint and and unity in that's how we're able to pull off these remote productions, as far as just having somebody in a control room, 1 or 2 people in a control room that are now on an intercom, and still being able to have those program feeds going back to a producer that's sitting in his living room.
Yeah, I mean, we can put a monitor wall, or we can put a big chunk of a monitor wall, like an MVP or a VIP multi-viewer.
Anything on our in-house router.
Send it to the producer's living room. They've got Unity on their smartphone, or and are able to sort of functionally collaborate. Yes, it's missing some of the bells and whistles and some of the granularity, but this is also an environment where, you know, TSNs may be trying to put together a show for the first time in an extreme automation environment where there's only one technical operator in the control room, on a show that they would never have attempted this before. They would normally have, you know, a few weeks ago, they would have had a full control room full of people and a bunch of guys in the studio. And, you know, today they're trying to do the same thing with one person in the control room and everyone else in their living room. It is absolutely doable, but nothing happens quickly.
I think there's also something to be said, though, is behind the scenes, we live behind the scenes, and we're making it work with, you know, milliseconds of delay or whatever it is. But as long as our IO is all in the same place,
yeah,
the production that's going out, ideally, can still be, you know, somewhat tight when you get used to those latencies and things like that. So yeah, we struggle behind the scenes, but by keeping everything in that one remoting into that production control room to all the gear, everything still can look pretty damn tight.
Absolutely. Well,
Michael,
only 1 minute away from when Anthony wrote down in my agenda here, questions. And I see 8:12 on my clock here, Anthony. So
yeah, I see the same.
Over to you.
Well, Michael, you know, I got to say it's really appreciated that you come and share and talk about this in this society, and you're really sharing and disseminating information that is of world class. And it's awesome to see that, you know, the problems we are facing scale up and down. You know, the home user that wants to record their buddies in Nova Scotia at their kitchen party, want to synchronize, and how do they do it? How do they accomplish it? And what CBC does, and what a lot of radio stations do, is exactly what I presented in the beginning, which is we did an offline record, and it was delayed by 3 minutes, or it could have been delayed by, I could have delivered you that file 10 minutes ago, and you can air it directly from wherever location you are. And there is live, and there is delayed by 3 minutes, and there's delayed by 1 minute. And we are playing this new game, I think, in broadcast, that is a very fourth dimensional, you know, time management thing. Sure, we've got transport media, we've got new emerging IP standards, we have control that is emerging as a standardized control protocol to control some of these things. And we are kind of caught, you know, like the medical system, like all of the resources of the whole world, by surprise. You know, like you say, the pandemic meeting that was every 3 weeks, we're going to increase it to, you know, maybe twice a month. And the CBC does build systems very much for war. You know, I think pandemic is one thing, war is another. I wish we should do one of these remote meetings with, I've got a colleague at the Parliament building. You know, it'd be amazing to see how they keep that place afloat and those meetings happening and the changes that are going to occur. I am looking at questions. We're opening up the chat room. The chat box is essentially there for questions. You know, somebody said Reaper. Ninjam. I don't know, 9 Inch Nails Jam. I don't know what he's trying to say about. Jonathan, shout out to Bell in general. Bell Fiber Home, fantastic. It is symmetrical rates. Michael, you're very much on the Bell Media side. How does Bell Media really distance itself from Bell, the ISP and telco? And what are some of the things that, you can speak to that, like in terms of home internet use? Are your producers and staff getting fiber directly to the door, and are you able to increase that with the leveraging of your parent company? What is the future there?
You like to pack a lot of questions into one statement, don't you, Anthony?
You're learning.
I do. Actually, I make a statement and then I ask no question. I didn't even ask a question there.
Yeah. Well, look, we don't distance. In fact, Howard and Roy and Ryan and I and the rest of our colleagues here, we are actually, we self-identify as Bell Media and as TV guys, but in fact, our reporting line is up through a division called Bell Network, up to our CTO, and so we're actually really feel this very deep kinship with the men and women across the country, 16,000 employees in Bell Network, who are responsible for the architecture that underpins all Bell services, and in a world like we're suffering through right now, media is important to us, and it's important to our viewers, and it's important to Canadians, but you'll understand maybe if it's a bit of an edge case, right? So everything that we do is being measured up against the requirement to maintain telephony as an essential service everywhere. So, we have people working in control rooms who are annoyed that it's taking us a while to find, a tertiary supply of sanitary wipes to wipe down equipment. But meanwhile, our health and safety people are also trying to provision our field services guys who are going into hospitals and into the back of ambulances, and real those are the people who are supporting real emergency services. So
very much so.
So in that world, we are absolutely directly connected to that effort, and I might get the numbers wrong, but I think there's something like nearly 60 individual sort of products or services that Bell is responsible for, which are sort of listed as essential services, and Bell Media has a handful of those. Things like the national news being something that we're particularly focused on, like you are, of keeping on the air regardless. So no, it's very much top of mind, how we keep going, and everybody on this call who has multiple clients, and that's almost all of us, understand this really weird thing where every time you're talking to a client, you have to sort of get your head around the fact that their worldview suggests that they're the most important thing in the world, and everyone you talk to, and everyone you talk to is the most important thing in the world. Well, we have the same thing, and they're all in the same big blue boat called Bell, or in Bell Media. And so I have to sort of sit and listen to, someone, a sales producer who's trying to produce, videos for sales, who's really annoyed that it's taking us some time to get around to setting up his remote workflow so that he can continue to produce his sales videos from home. But meanwhile, we're killing ourselves trying to make sure that, CP24 doesn't go off the air.
Very much so.
And
there's thousands of restaurants around Toronto that would have silence, and it would be awkward if CP24 was off the air.
Well, they're already on mute most of the time, so that's fine.
At the same time, you're at the luxury of being able to utilize the network to create like a dark fiber, so you could do something like, I don't know, pull a band together in a whole bunch of different remote locations.
Well, it's true. Listen, I'm going to be the last to speak ill of the fact that, we have several million kilometers of fiber buried in the ground, because it does let me do absurd things like, spend 40 gigabit connections so I can drag a bass player and a drummer along for the ride. No, there's absolutely upside.
But there's the video side of that. I think we as the Audio Engineering Society, we can safely say that when the internet is capable of something that is time synchronized, that has distributed precision time protocol to the network, that turns it from, as you've put it, belt driven to sprocket driven to satellite driven. I love satellite driven precision for my audio recording.
Yes.
So as soon as something that is distributed like PTP can be made available through these gargantuan networks, as soon as, from my ISP, whomever it is, can distribute NTP as well as PTP. Actually, you don't even need NTP, you just need PTP. Then it's very difficult to even know what time any of this stuff originated. And that's a problem with the public internet, is unless we pay for enterprise grade services, which we really can't to my home. Like, I want 3-phase power in my house. It's going to cost me $75,000 for 3-phase power in my house. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen ever. So
we don't all have heavy machinery in our houses like you do, Anthony.
This is a problem. I have several addictions and I'm working on it. It's hard. It's hard. But I can't get, can you, so here's maybe you can't answer this question. If I had a fiber to my house, could you effectively turn that into a 1 gig link, symmetrical bidirectional 1 gig link?
Yeah, technically, yes.
It's not dark fiber. It's not dark fiber to you, because that would require a crazy amount of splices.
No, hold on. It is dark fiber. It's a question of how many patches would be between. So depending on where you were located and how far away from a CO you were, and a trunk switch, it might not be achievable, because there might be enough hops between. If you have fiber to your premises, you have fiber to the home, fiber to your unit, fiber to your business, then if we can make enough patches, we can create an endpoint to endpoint connection. There might be enough patches in there over the distance and because every patch is going to cause you attenuation on that fiber connection. It might actually be the case that you couldn't do it, not today. But for a great number of locations, that would absolutely be possible, right?
But if you had an encoded J2K, not even J2K, even lower than a J2K video stream, even at under 100 megabits, like we have some remote stations that are, like we have a 100 megabit link, and we've been doing J2K for 2 decades.
Yeah, we've got lots of the same. Yep.
Yeah, but you can't guarantee the quality of service, or us as home users, to Jonathan's point, is, we can't actually be given that. Like, I can't get a 3-phase power to my house. It's not a utility that is available to the public.
The truth of the matter is, until, so I'm a card-carrying member of the AES and a lifelong, sort of TV and sound guy. So I'm about to speak about stuff that I don't actually know anything about. So just with that as the proviso, 5G is probably the answer, and not because I think that wireless signals to a device that looks like this is the answer. But the truth of the matter is that the capacities of the 5G network are causing telcos like ours to invest so enormously year over year in building the foundational infrastructure.
Yes.
Because of the capacity that 5G will allow, and things like network slicing, that I think the arrival of 5G as a practical matter is also going to correspond to us being able to do much more robust, and from our point of view in the media, more interesting things on residential landed connections, like fiber to the home and fiber to the premises, because the backbone is going to become so much more capacious and capable.
Yes, yeah, and distributed. And when you distribute it or decentralize, again, that's exactly what we're all doing right now, is we're decentralizing from productions.
That point, Anthony, that is because it's so the point of decentralization is so interesting. I thought with CBC, the sort of failure of the centralized architecture, it seemed, was what caused us to drop all these local news, and we were really heavily chastised for that. So I wonder at what point the willingness for all the local will override the concerns about quality, or whether it will call for more of a distributed approach, because this cry for local has been so strong.
I think the nature, I think that's a really excellent point, but I don't know that necessarily means that we're going to see a return to that massive duplication of capability across a country as broad as Canada, and yet we'll see a twist into a different form of centralization. And probably for a lot of us at the pointy end of broadcast, that's probably the real meaning of what it's going to, that's probably the real meaning of virtualization, right? So, I mean, we can centralize in italics, we can centralize capability and God help me for saying the word in the cloud. But I mean, you can centralize things in data centers and capabilities in data centers, despite the fact that the control of said capacities is maybe centrally located or decentralized. You're absolutely right. Getting rid of capacity in the local stations and centralizing it in a few big buildings, and we've done the same as every other broadcaster, including you guys. Yeah, that's absolutely tying our hands right now a little bit, because there's a finite number. Once upon a time, it wasn't that many years ago, there was a master control in every station across the country. And now there's a master control in 3. And so that means that's a lot of eggs in 3 baskets. And I'm sure you guys are kind of in the same sort of boat. And maybe that's the real promise of being able to dematerialize some of these processes. And if that means hosting some of this processing capability, on-prem or otherwise, but in server farms or in data centers, I don't know if it, I suspect we're going to have more kinship with fog than clouds, but anyways, yeah.
Well, I can speak, if I could, for the CBC. We've only got 2 major hubs as opposed to 3, so it's a lot of the focus, for the most part, especially for the public, keep in mind, has been on the edge for getting the news, the stories, things that are relevant. Even for this group here, we have people that are fully around the whole Greater Toronto area, while we are being hosted somewhere, but we care about a certain bit of information, and so it's that where the biggest focus is going to be is in the hubs that are more relevant. It's more granular, not necessarily the control. Obviously, I think that is expanding. The abilities to remotely control it are expanding. The sad thing is, for technicians, I've seen for television productions, automated systems that will be taken over by people. It's going to be more the end actual content producers, not the technician in the old days. Unfortunately, Howard, I apologize, but us old fogies will be relegated to a computer taking our position for even more so as we move forward. So it's going to be content is king, and keep in mind, while everyone's wanting a lot of these great services now, will in 2 years the same thoughts be there? We'll see.
Yeah, you're not wrong, and knowing that this trend line not only is going to continue, but the experience we're all having right this minute is definitively going to change. I mean, I can think of a half dozen projects, that that up till a few weeks ago, we would have been expecting to tackle this year, that even if we have a very quick resolution to this current crisis and we're getting back to normal, I can't think of a single project that we're not going to be wanting to reapproach, and in potentially radically different ways, specifically because of lessons learned here. I don't know, like large format consoles that can be remotely controlled elegantly. Like, I don't know, little things like that, let's just say for giggles.
Big time.
Production switchers and playback devices and graphics engines, and certainly inside our company, where we have a fairly high degree of uniformity of technical systems across the country, there are some notable exceptions geographically where some regions have, for instance, to continue to use something like Expression or Inscriber for graphics, whereas we're using Chiron, for instance. I mean, just to name one.
And those are heavy duty resources locally, and
I can see where that's not going to. I can see where that's not going to be allowed to continue. I can see where the press to uniformity, because of situations like this, is going to be so enormous that you're going to need a really strong argument for being the odd man out.
So, Michael, given the amount of data being used the last few weeks, is there any throughput issues or speed bandwidth? Is the infrastructure ready for more than what we're putting through now? Because the asker Terry here, he's very right that now everybody all of a sudden has gone fog. We need a fog light. Somebody says rotary phase converter. Yes, I've got a VFD actually. We can talk about that, Mr. Paul. We can talk about that later.
The answer is we've got lots of capacity. It's not bottomless.
Yes.
Happily, we're in the business of building capacity, and our field services people are not working by remote. It's very difficult to operate a backhoe from your couch, or a trenching machine or something like that.
So far, until next week.
Yeah, until we have full telepresence robots.
Hey, Michael, just over the last probably week and a half, I've not been able to even dial out of my cell phone. I've had people, oddly enough, the data's been getting through. I'm getting emails and texts, no problem, but doing a voice call has not been easy the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The last probably 10 days, I should say.
And we're working double time on all of those issues.
Did the phone company dust the telephone equipment? Because it doesn't get used that much. It can't get used that much.
Well, and that's just it. The amount of demand on the phone system just in general, and especially things like our toll-free services are just being absolutely hammered, specifically because of things like this and people using phone bridges and phone meetings and things like that. So the demand is extraordinary, and it's a oh, look at that. Andy's showing us a binaural head. I love it. That's not Fritz. I don't know who that is. Is that a bespoke head? Anyways, capacity is not an insubstantial thing, Terry, and every aspect of the infrastructure is sort of being smacked right now. And and there's thousands. Rest assured, there's thousands of people who aren't sleeping much, trying to make sure this gets resolved.
Well, as I always say, for us little guys who are trying to do some more guerrilla type broadcasting and webcasting, it's disconcerting when I have difficulty making a cell phone call or receive a cell phone call, knowing that, within 2 hours I'm trying to go live to air with probably like a 1080p kind of 6,000 KB webcast.
I'll offer my apologies. I feel your pain. It's cold comfort, but know that we're suffering the same problems, and we're half an hour away from doing the national news or something, and we're suffering the same depredations. We don't have any sort of secret backdoor access to the phone system, despite the fact that we work for the phone company. So we have the same issues.
And actually, let me just jump in. Yeah, we can't jump the queue either. I put in an order for faster internet to facilitate remote video editing on March 21st. They're slated to come on April 21st. I did try, but I tried telling the lady on the phone, the weight of BellMedia rests on my shoulders. I need that 100 megabit connection. Didn't get me.
We have special accounts for emergency. On that note, gentlemen, everyone, this has been another great experiment in broadcast history. We've all experienced this Tuesday, March 31st at 8:35 p.m. here. I appreciate everyone for really taking the time to join in on this conversation. I know we could go for hours and hours, and this is the first licensed meeting we've had. So, feel free to, next time you got to get a couple of beers for this meeting. The comments and the questions, I've heard a lot about OBS software, and we've talked about OBS. We've used OBS as an organization, and it may be a topic, and it may be a business opportunity for people who are looking for work to learn OBS and learn how to web stream and learn how to broadcast audio and learn how to do podcasts. With every change of the world, there is an opportunity to be gainfully employed. Let me tell you that. Thank you, Michael, very much for hosting this and producing this. Michael produced this with the help of Earl McCluskey from the AES Executive, who is our bulletin editor, who is our email web editor, special events coordinator. Thank you very much, Earl, for making this happen and handling the very old technology meeting as well. We will unpause that once the global pandemic is settled down. The AES executive, myself, I'm Anthony, I'm the chairman. Vice chair is Ross Whitney. Our past chair, Alan Clayton from Rochester, joined us on the phone. We also had Rich Waddy from Rochester on the phone, people from all around. Carl Matchett is our secretary, records all of our meetings, does recaps to this. Jeff Bamford, treasurer. Membership. We are always looking for new members, people to get themselves into the AES, looking for the opportunity to network. So if you know anybody, bring a friend. Hopefully next time we figure out how to do more viewers on something like this, and send the invitations out, share the invitations. Brian Martin, diversity from Montreal. Marketing, Robert DeVito. Sponsors, relations, Kevin Liver, Wardbeck Systems. Operations, Frank Lockwood. Committee members. We are always interested in having people participate in these committees. With the recent COVID virus, all of our meetings are now online. Our meetings have been transitioning towards executive meetings that are online that are productive, and we do need to have more evenings of beer. So I think maybe once this is over, we will just have an AES beer fest or something like that.
Here.
Just a straight social. Nobody says anything. There's no presentations. Just everybody, be as loud as you can. Bring your earplugs and just yell at each other over some beers. Committee members, Warren Beck, good friend, colleague, Raphael Capone, James Boudelier, Blair Francie, Dan Mamboquette, Lisa Patterson, Cy Potma. We have liaisons that we are getting to schools. We, as the AES, believe that sharing this information, having these types of meetings, having these conversations, it is very much important to us to have a student section that grows. We appreciate Jim Cox, who's always around, contributing members, Bob Breen, Jim Hayward, and Denis Tremblay. If I've missed anybody from the exec, I apologize. Once again, our typical supporters, like if it wasn't for anything, we would be typically having this meeting at Ryerson, not for March, not for April, because it is whatchamacallit, it is finals, so we don't do that. Our friends at Professional Sound Magazine, which is one of the last standing news rags of our industry. So please grab a copy wherever you can or subscribe to it online. Sheridan, the CERT Institute, does indeed host some of our events sometimes. Gear Audio, YSL Pro, Electrosonic, Solotech, Sonotechnique, AVShop.ca, Adamson, BellMedia, Lawo, Global, USS, and BRTB. Good night, everyone.
Should I be playing the tinkle music now, Anthony, or what's
Yeah,
the
is there-
story? Because
is-
like
is-
that was the
is there-
longest credit roll in the history of AES meetings. What's going on?
Man,
You working remotely, Noonan? You forgot to roll the music.
We're gonna need to fix this up for next time because like
You couldn't play him out?
somebody, is there,
There's that control thing coming up again.
here's a control thing. So, good night, everybody, and stay safe.